Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I mistrust people who I don't know or don't have a long track record with. And when that's the case, yes, I'm going to have some misgivings about them. Since I want people to actually hear me this time and not have an automatic knee-jerk reaction, I'm going to refrain from using names of people who I spoke about yesterday. We're not going to deal with names, we're going to deal with concepts and organizations. Hopefully this will give the people who hear this some sort of objectivity and distance. Because when people are personally involved with something, their objectivity is usually the first thing to go. One of the main gripes that came from a number of people who bombed my YouTube comments and Twitter posts was that I didn't know this person, so I need to trust them, because if I knew them like these anonymous commenters know them, then I trust them too. Again, trust must be based on something. So what's been presented to me that I can place my faith in? And by the way, trust, that's a two-way street. Is this reparations task force a good thing? Well, that depends. Are they truly working to make sure that the government of California cuts the check for its FBA DAS residents? If so, then they are a good thing. But the task force only narrowly agreed on a lineage-based definition, however flawed. And there really shouldn't have been any dispute about that. This is not some new and unexplored area of American history. This is the country's original sin. How could there be any doubt or confusion about what it is and who it was done against? Another concern is that they're working largely in secret, so what input does the grassroots have? I guess the people who were attacking me yesterday think that we should cross our fingers and hope that the same people who are pushing for a reparations for all policy will now simply accept the lineage-based definition and not try to change it even though they were against it. I never said that the task force members have to be as strident or aggressive in their language as I am to satisfy my doubts, but the truth is, the task force undercut its own credibility by not establishing from the very beginning that this was about slavery, full stop. Why am I so didactic about this California Reparations Task Force? First of all, it's in California, the most populous state in the country. There's a reason why they say, as goes California, so goes the nation. Or do you think it's some sort of coincidence that both the Speaker of the House and the Vice President are from California? The principle of the states as incubators for national policy is still very much true. Now, let's move on to my remarks themselves. From the outset, let me say I won't tolerate any defeatism or any people who are looking for an excuse to give up. We don't play that around here. The biggest problem with living under oppression, especially if it's lasted a long time, is that you take on the identity that the society's assigned to you, which, as Dr. Claude Anderson explained, we are the designated losers of this society, and that's the identity that's been forced upon us. So, what do oppressed people do? They come up with coping mechanisms. A lot of black people retreat into heavy denial. They just pretend that they don't live in a racist society, and they tell themselves and others that they can do anything they want and racism doesn't exist. You usually see these mental defectives on the right. And on the left, you get the black folks who tell themselves that their white liberal buddy is really their best friend and everything's hunky-dory, at least within those confines. That's what they tell themselves. Denial is the first psychological response to trauma. We tell ourselves whatever occurred isn't really happening, this can't be real. And sadly, a lot of us never get past this phase. At some point, we have to accept the reality of our situation, no matter how unpleasant, because that's the only way we can get to the point where we can actually begin to change things. But what must also be said is that a lot of black people simply sit back waiting for the other shoe to drop. Yes, we've been conditioned to be that way because being robbed of freedom of movement or even basic choice does breed apathy. We've been reduced to nothing more than just mere spectators in our own lives, watching as this racist society puts on its little sideshows, which we already know are stage managed from the very beginning. The cynicism is understandable, but the defeatism is not. The first setback, the first difficulty, and some of us will immediately retreat and say, I knew it, this was never going to work, why even try? I won't tolerate that. That's a very quick way to get blocked by me. But I also understand that I need to clarify some things and to do it rigorously. Whether honestly or not, more than a few people seem to have taken the completely wrong message away from yesterday's moment of truth, and because of that, I want to make it crystal clear what I meant. The California Reparations Task Force was not created by us. And when you look at who is on it, you see people who have been a part of certain political circles for years. The task force members weren't chosen because they've done the most to push the issue of reparations. They were chosen because the powers that be, which funded the task force, saw them as politically reliable. They certainly wouldn't put anybody on there who was seen as politically threatening. Now, for those who say, well, they can't speak about it the same way that you do, they've got to speak about it like that because, well, reasons. Here's the thing. You're not going to sneak up on this subject, okay? You're not going to tiptoe your way past this one. The black immigrants and the non-black people of color who have been benefiting from the laws, programs, and initiatives that we fought to bring into being, they're not going to simply watch as we get what's owed to us, because they haven't in the past. Other people getting the fruits of our labors, that's been standard operating procedure in this country for 500 years. And even now, you got those who may not have been plantation owners or even the descendants of plantation owners, and yet you got these folk who feel that they are entitled to it because that's the con game that's been going on for so many generations now, since the end of chattel slavery at least. White power has handed other people the fruits of our work for a very long time, to the point that a lot of them now lay claim to our history, at least the fight for justice part. People whose folk didn't even get here until after the civil rights movement was over, in many cases didn't show up until the last 20 years or so, and yet, when it suits them, they will refer to the history that our ancestors made as if somehow they had something to do with it, though they make sure never to claim the slavery part. Oh, they'll talk about the civil rights movement. When it comes to that, they'll say we and us and our when we. The Black Power movement, well, we and us and our when we. But when it comes time to talk about the history of slavery in this country, suddenly it becomes them, they, those people over there. And this is not to say that all of the black immigrants to a man have done this, but the point is there's a reality there. And we've denied it for far too long. The black grassroots have done the most to push the solid, specific definition of reparations and, most importantly, who it applies to. That task force clearly didn't. The most simple, basic thing of all is to agree that reparations is about slavery. Instead, you got people on the so-called task force who, as far as they were concerned, this was an opportunity to finesse themselves some money for something that had nothing to do with them. And they are concerned about the fact that they don't want this to become habit-forming. They don't want this to become the new normal. The black grassroots should have been deeply included from the very beginning with this. There's plenty of people in California, like Brother Tariq and others, who have been 10 toes in this for the longest time. Why the world were they not on that task force? I'm not talking about being a contributor, I mean being on it. It's not because nobody knew about them. The only reason that this didn't become a complete and thorough abomination, just a total crap show, was because of the efforts of people in the grassroots in California, principally Tariq and the rest of the family out there. They stepped in and changed the course of this thing. It's certainly not as bad as it would have been without the work they put in, so that's significant in and of itself. I'm not saying that the task force is a bad idea, but the problem happens to be there are serious problems with how it was conceived and how it went about things. And those concerns are still extant. So when somebody brags about how they had a 5-4 decision on the definition of who it applies to, I'm asking, why was it even that close? Somebody puts together a slavery reparations task force, and practically half the people on the task force can't agree that it ought to be about slavery? They think it ought to be about everything else? How can there be disagreement on who slavery reparations refers to? Because you have a number of people on that task force who can't trace their lineage back to slavery. They've gotten things for being an immigrant or LGBT or some other category other than just black. So as they see it, they've been getting caked off by the system this long. Reparations is just another giveaway that they should receive simply because. So no, I do not see the way things have been gone about here as being some sort of chess move. And please stop it with that talking point. Every person who uses that chess move canard, they're usually proven wrong a few seconds later when the chess move is inevitably revealed to be a crook move. You're talking about a task force that's supposed to be dealing with a specific crime that happened to a specific group of people. Why is anyone apparently just bothered to talk about it? Why we got to talk around and tiptoe around it? This only became an issue because the white powers that be saw us talking. They saw that we were attaching the issue of reparations to the vote, and they wanted to head this off at the pass to get out in front of it. And looking at the profiles of the people who spent a great deal of yesterday attacking me, I'm probably going to be restarting that up today. It looked like they were groupies for the subject of my critique. They couldn't tell you what was wrong with what I said or even inaccurate with what I said, and yet they were furious that I said it. I have never been one to let the perfect become the enemy of the practical, but I'm also not one who decides to make excuses for things that I know should have been better. We ought to make sure that anybody involved with this task force knows that we are indeed watching what it is that they're doing. We're paying attention. But ultimately, as many of you noted, we do have to go beyond that. A large part of why they wanted their meetings to be virtual meetings was so that they wouldn't have to deal with the people directly. The entire conceit behind the California Reparations Task Force is that they were sanctioned and set up by that state's government, so whatever they're doing is supposed to be handed off to policymakers. That's what makes their work official. That it, at least on paper, has the potential to translate into real policy. And if they do indeed follow through with it as they're supposed to, if it is handled properly and does not devolve into the same old bait and switch, then more power to them. This would indeed be a model for the nation. Speaking of which, other people have talked about the need to begin legislative-level reparations groups in other states, to become proactive instead of reactive. I agree. The model that must be set is that those who are advocates for reparations, and not yet another giveaway to everyone except us, we must be the ones who form such groups and who are running it. Of course, the big obstacle, the entire reason that this California task force is getting attention in the first place is, how do you make it where such a research group or advocacy group can translate into policy? Well, you gotta have a government or legislature that is actually receptive to what that advocacy group is doing. That's the obstacle. To have a writ from the state in question that what we're doing has been given a mandate to inform the legislature on a particular policy, either because they chose to impanel us or because we forced the issue. It would be great to see a reparations task force set up in New York State. I guess we'll see, but one thing's for sure. The people who made reparations an issue cannot be left on the outside while other people, many of whom are opposed to our goals, are the ones left to craft policy. You see, that's the whole point of what I said yesterday, and what I'm saying today. It's the entire point of every criticism and compliment that I've said about the task force and the people on it. It's the whole reason why we can't be silent and just let things play out. Justice is simply too important to be left up to chance. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Keitha Dixon, Miss Debbie, Mr. M, Robert Fletcher, and Reginald Caldwell. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.